Hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm going to be doing a series of videos introducing the concept of version control and showing a few of the common actions that you can do with version control. Now, for this video, I'm going to be just showing what version control is and giving you a little bit of information about why you should use it, why it's a good idea. Okay, so what is version control and why do we need it? How does it work? Right, well, first of all, version control is a tool, right? It is a tool that you will use in development. It is used for basically every studio in the world, whether they be a game development studio or a more traditional software development studio, they will be using version control. So it is absolutely something that you should start learning so that you can be of use in the workforce. All right, so why do we need this tool? What is it for? Well, it solves three common problems in development, plus probably a lot more, but these are the three main problems that this type of tool will solve for you. So the first problem, and the most common one here, is you have a project. You've been working away on it, it's going great, and everything is going according to plan. You add a new feature to this project, and suddenly it doesn't work. The project is broken, maybe you have lots of build errors, maybe something horrible has happened, and for whatever reason, you want to go back to the previous working version. Maybe you decide you don't want this feature, maybe you decide you need some portion of the way that the program was before. Whatever the case is, you want to go back and use that previous version. The problem is, normally, you cannot do that. Right? Normally, you have saved and closed the program. If you reopened it, you don't have your edit history. You don't have a way to go back to this older version of the program. Okay, so this is a really big problem in development because a lot of times developers change their mind partway through a project. Things change. So how do we solve this? Well, one thing I see students do a lot is to have a lot of different copies of your project, all named things like draft 1, draft 1.2, draft 2, final 2, final real, and so on. That is not a sustainable way to do things. There's a lot of reasons why this isn't a good idea. One is that you're copying this project a whole bunch of times. That's wasting space. But the most important reason this is not a good idea is because you later down the line realize that you don't know, you want to go back to some earlier version of the project where a particular feature was still in place and because you decided you want to use that feature in the full version. You look at these piles of drafts with these names, you don't know where that particular feature was added or removed. You don't know where any of those things happened. You can't check what has changed easily between these drafts. There's no labeling on them aside from just numerical. And even if you tried to add labels here, it would be really difficult. You wouldn't have enough space in just the name. You maybe would have to have a change log as you went along, which you could do, but it just gets a little bit difficult to remember to maintain that. Everything just becomes much more difficult, and it's really hard to find where your changes were that you want to go back to. Okay, so this is the solution. All right, our solution is version control, and the way version control works is that when you have a change to your project, a particular state of your project, and a state just means how the project is at a point in time. So when you have your project in a particular state, you make what is called a commit. And a commit is like a snapshot of all of the project state, all of the files, how everything is at that point in time for the project. All right, and say that's working fine. What you do then is you take that commit and you commit it to version control. You commit it to your version control repository. And your repository is like a database of all of your commits. And you put this commit into your repository and you include a commit message that explains what you did. Once you do that, it goes into a database that is searchable. And later, if you're like, okay, when did I add this cube? You can go through the database, you can search for it, and find the commit in which the cube was added. Okay? And so that's another commit in your database. Every time you make a significant change to your project, you will need to update this database with a new commit, a new snapshot. And this database is called the repository. And it's basically like a project for your project, right? It contains whatever game development or software development project you're working on. And inside there, inside that repository, there is snapshots of each of the points in time where this project existed, where you made a commit. So you can go back to an earlier version of the project using this. And it's very easy to go back if you find that your change has broken something, or for whatever reason you need to go back. You can do that using version control. So it's searchable and it lets you easily go back to an earlier version of the project. Okay, problem number 2 that you may have, and I've definitely had this exact problem and also similar problems, is you're working on your project and it's going great, just like it always does when working on your project, and you're on your computer and suddenly the computer goes on fire or something else happens, that you have a hardware failure, you have a corrupt file, something horrible happens to your project, and if you didn't have backups, you'll lose it. So version control is not only about backups, as we saw, the really main reason is to be able to go between different versions, but it also allows easy backups of your work. All right, so that's kind of a secondary function that most version control has. So our solution here to this problem is to use version control, which lets you, when you make a commit, push that commit up to the cloud, to a version of your repository that is online, that is on the cloud somewhere on a server. And so you can push that up, and then you can actually also use that as a secondary helpful thing here to then download that same project onto another computer, make a commit, send that up, and get that same commit and pull it down on another computer. So this actually lets you not only back up to the cloud, but also easily sync your project between multiple computers. Now, yes, there are absolutely things out there that do this for you that aren't version control. For example, Google Drive or Dropbox. They allow you to send files up, they allow you to download files, they allow you to automatically sync files between computers. That is already a thing. But version control lets you do that in addition to the first problem solution, which was going back and forth between these different versions of the project. So it really does allow both of those things, and that's the key here. So yes, Google Drive and all of them are fine, but they don't do the version control part of things, so this really does both of those things. What you don't need to do is put your version control project inside Google Drive, because that's just excessive. You don't need it copied up to Google Drive as well. It's already being copied onto your hosting, repository, website, whatever that may be. All right, and we will cover that in a future tutorial. Okay, the third problem is one to do with working in a team, and this is a place where version control very much shines. So say you're working on a project in a team, and John Doe up there, he wants to add a triangle, and Jane Doe down here wants to add a cube. And what you really want to have happen is that the result will be a version of the project with both the triangle and the cube. What actually happens is you get two separate versions of the project, one with a triangle and one with the cube. You can't see the triangle underneath my face there, but it's there. So you end up with two separate versions of the project, and this is not helpful. All right, what you really want is a single version that is merged together. And so then what you'd have to do in this situation is just manually combine these two projects, and that just is a waste of time, of everyone's time. So what do you do instead? Well, version control will allow you to combine them using something called a merge. So the graphic I have here isn't exactly how things happen, but it's a good indicator for beginners. So say John Doe over here and Jane Doe over here, they're both working on the project, and they actually, their project, because they're using version control, their project is associated with this other version in the cloud. So when John Doe makes his triangle edit and Jane Doe makes her cube edit, they're going to push their versions up to the cloud. And so John Doe pushes his triangle up there, and now the cloud version has the triangle. Now, what would really happen is not what I'm about to show here. So Jane Doe would not actually be able to directly push her cube up. What would happen is when she tried to do that, the program would see there was a new version online. It would then ask her to pull that new version down. Her version would then have a triangle, and then she'd push up the updated combo triangle cube version. But the reality, the result in the end is that the online version would have both, and then these two would both be able to get each other's work. So the key takeaway here, aside from the details, is that when you are using version control in a team, it makes it easier to merge your changes together into one project, the changes that two separate people are doing on the project. Now, there are always problems with merging. It's not always an easy process, but it's still a lot better than the alternative. So I'm not going to pretend that version control is all fun and games and easiness, because there are often some weird issues that crop up when you're trying to merge projects, especially if you are using an engine like Unreal or Unity. Sometimes issues appear because when you both work in the same scene, there can be problems, etc. But overall, this is still a much better solution than the alternative of manually combining things. Okay, so that's great. Fantastic. How do we use it? What are the actual tools we're using here? Because we've been referring to version control, which version control is a whole category of tools. It's not a single program. So what we will be using, there's 3 sort of levels for version control programs and services. The first level is the system, the version control system that you're going to be using. And there are a lot of options out there. Git is the one that I will be talking about for my tutorial, but others you might have seen are Subversion. That's a very common one still used in the industry. Plastic, which can actually be very beginner friendly, and Mercurial, which I think is being phased out a bit. And I'm sure there are even more out there. That's just a few of the main ones. These systems are often command line. So they aren't easy for beginners, especially, and even experienced people to use regularly, because it's sometimes much easier to visualize the changes you've made in a graphical interface. So a lot of times these won't be used directly, and instead you'll have a second layer in between this and the third layer, which we'll talk about shortly. And that second layer is the application and the graphical user interface, the GUI, that you will be using to interact with this system so that you don't have to interact with it directly. All right, for us, we are using the GitHub Desktop GUI. And the GitHub Desktop GUI is one that's provided by GitHub, which we will also be using in this tutorial. There are a lot of other ones out there. The GitHub Desktop I've chosen because it's very beginner friendly. However, it does have some limitations that you might not like if you are an experienced developer. I do not personally use the GitHub Desktop GUI for my own development. Instead, I use a GUI called SourceTree. There are a few other ones out there like Tortoise SVN, and I'm sure there are many more, but those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But GitHub Desktop is the one we're going to be using. And again, this is a GUI that goes between the system and the website, which we'll be talking about shortly. So the last thing that you'll be using is an online hosting website or hosting platform for your repository. So this is an online host for your repository hosting. And I am personally going to recommend GitHub because, again, we're using GitHub Desktop. It works very well with GitHub. It works very seamlessly. And GitHub used to not allow private repositories, but they now do allow those for free. And it's also a Microsoft product now, so it's highly integrated with a lot of Microsoft, other Microsoft products. So overall, GitHub's a really good choice for beginners. Again, you might not choose to use this. There are a lot of other platforms out there. I personally have used Bitbucket in the past. There's also another one called GitLabs, and there are others that you can find as well. All right, these are the common ones. So GitHub is what we will be using for this tutorial, for the tutorials that I will be showing you going forward. All right, that's all for this introduction. You may wish to test your knowledge after seeing this introduction. I provided a Kahoot for you to use to test yourself in the description for this video. Let me know how you do on the Kahoot in the comments, and please let me know if there is anything confusing or anything else you'd like to know more about. I'll be posting a tutorial soon with a general overview on how to use GitHub Desktop for the most basic Git actions, and I hope to post more tutorials in the future for more advanced uses of version control. Thank you for watching. Bye.